The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, welcome to the general training session for our lead conversion module that we've got scheduled for today. I appreciate everyone signing on our last class of the week. Oh, actually, I take that back. There is a single table dedupe class, I think, at 3 today. So just before we dive into the lead conversion module, just to make sure everything from a GoToWebinar standpoint is working the way it should, if you can hear me and you can see my screen, if you will just raise your hand or shoot me a little comment, that will let me know that everything is working the way that it should. And I see hands up, so we are good to go. Okay, so our lead conversion module. If you are looking at your Today page, which is where we are now, lead conversion is under the cleansing group of modules. And it is a newer module. It really now combines two previous modules into one. So before September of this year, lead conversion was split into separate lead to contact and lead to accounts. And now those two modules have been combined into one very powerful lead conversion module. And the reason I kind of go through that history is because we may have users on the call who are previous lead to account and lead to contact users, or notice that those are now missing and have been replaced with this. So we like to kind of review that history. Now, the purpose of this lead conversion module is to take your leads and compare them against the contact object or the account object or both, for the purpose of trying to determine if that record exists in another object or not. Okay, so it's a deduplication module in that sense, trying to determine if there's duplication between your lead objects and contacts and accounts. With that, we have a lot of new bells and whistles to talk about to make things easier in terms of pulling down leads to analyze. So we'll kind of go through all of that during the next hour. Always remember that everything we're going to talk about today is documented in the help docs for lead conversion. So your green question mark here to the left of the module name is a really good resource for when you kind of venture out on your own and start creating your lead conversion scenarios. If you have any questions during the training today, feel free to use your GoToWebinar panel, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have. And with that, let's dive in. Okay, so when I click on lead conversion, this module is different than all of the others in that it takes you through 4 steps from start to finish to build out a lead conversion scenario. What we're going to do today during the training is I kind of have it divided into 2 pieces. So initially, we're going to run through a pre-built lead conversion scenario that's available for you to use. So we'll load that up, and that'll kind of give you a look and feel for the 4 steps so you can kind of get an idea of what the end goal is here, kind of an overview. And then once we do that, once we've looked at it once, then we'll kind of take a step back, come back to the beginning, and work through building a scenario from scratch, which will really force us to talk about all of the different options that you have. And the reason that I split it up like that is I don't want to overwhelm you with all of that detail initially. So I want you to kind of get a feel for what we're doing here, and then we'll take that step back and kind of dive into the details. Okay, so to start with using this pre-built scenario, which is a new concept for our lead conversion process. Used to be you didn't have a pre-built scenario for lead conversion. Now you do. So if we come down here to load scenario, you'll see this once you've upgraded to the version that has this module. Sample lead conversion scenario, I'm just going to double click on that. Oh, one more thing. If you are a user who has built scenarios in the old lead to contact and lead to account, you can use those scenarios in this module. Just because it's a new module doesn't mean those are obsolete. What you'll do is when you go to load that scenario, down in the bottom right-hand corner, you're just going to use this drop down and indicate whether it's an old lead to contact scenario or old lead to account. And then you can load those up and manipulate them as needed. And then when you resave it or save it again, it will then save as this new lead conversion module scenario. Okay, so we've got our sample scenario up and running. The only modification I have made is I have gone in here and on my first step, this is where I'm choosing the leads that I want to pull down and compare. On that pre-built scenario, it is set to look at all leads, all contacts, and all accounts. The only change that I have made is I have gone in, and we'll take a closer look at this when we take that step back, but I have told it up here at the top to only look at records or leads in North Carolina. And then down at the bottom, I have the ability to choose my contacts and accounts to compare against. And I have indicated here that I only want to compare against leads in the state of North Carolina. Okay, and the only reason I do that is so that it doesn't take too long for our results grid to build. So your first tab here is really simple in that respect. If your goal was to compare all leads to all contacts and all accounts, you would just use your radio buttons over here on the right to indicate use all leads, use all contacts, and then pop over to your account tab here and select use all accounts. Okay, so when we go into step 2, this is another really simple stage. We're just choosing the fields we want to see in our results grid. Okay, so all of this, what we're doing in these first 3 steps, we're setting things up so that in our grid, we'll be able to see the leads that we're comparing or have been matched to their respective contacts and accounts. So in this screen, we're just choosing the fields that we need to see in that results grid to verify our results. Okay, and one trend that you're going to find here is we're doing a lot of things 3 times because we're working with 3 separate objects. So at the top, we're choosing the lead fields we want to see in our results grid. And then at the bottom, we're choosing the contact fields and the account fields that we want to see in our results grid. You don't have to compare against contacts and accounts at the same time. Okay, and we'll go back and take a look at that. But if you only wanted to compare against contacts, then you would only select contacts here. Same with if you just wanted to compare against accounts. So you really have a very high level of customization here to really make this process work for your individual data sets. Okay, now when we go into step 3, this is where we will spend a lot of time kind of dissecting this and talking about best practices when we go through all of this with a fine-tooth comb. But from step 3 here, we're setting up our matching criteria. So we're telling it how we want to compare leads to contacts, how we want to compare leads to accounts, and also what we want to happen if a lead does not match to an existing contact or account. And so from here, you'll see my first 3 match steps, I'm comparing against my contact object. And if we look at the detail of some of these, we'll be able to see the fields that we're matching on. Lead field matching to contact field. Let me get my little pointer so you can see. And then also we're able to use our mapping types here. If you've done any deduplication in DemandTools, you may be familiar with mapping types, but if not, that's okay. We're going to kind of talk about what some of these mean. But mapping types are what allow us to match field data together that may not be exactly the same. Okay, so maybe you have a company on a lead that's Staples Incorporated, but on the contact or the account, it's Staples Inc. And so mapping type kind of allows for some of those common variations that we see in certain fields to match more records together. So we have a couple of different match steps for each object. If you look at the naming conventions here, we typically recommend to start rigid. Okay, this rigid scenario is matching on several fields. But if we come down to our loose contact match step, we see that we're only matching on 3 fields. All right, and we'll go through and set some of this up so you'll get a really good look at this. And then kind of that same process here, matching against accounts. And then our final match step, we tell it what we want to happen for those records that didn't match to an existing contact or account. Do we want those to just kind of stay as leads and not touch them? Or do we want to convert them? And a question just came in, really good question, Tim. Did all of these matching steps come from the default scenario? And the answer is yes. So everything you're seeing now is in that pre-built scenario. But don't let it deter you. If it looks like it's too much or too rigid or you don't like some of the fields, you can manipulate any of this that you want to. So this is just the jumping off point. You can delete whole match steps if you needed to, okay? Or you can remove individual fields if you didn't need to match on some of these. So again, this pre-built scenario is yours to kind of do what you need to with. Either leave it as is or an example, or slice it and dice it and really make it your own. Good question. Within all of these match steps also, we have the ability to create opportunities, and then we have some notification options as well. So the final piece of this, and this kind of high-level look, we go into our results grid at this point, and we're just going to choose our Find Matches option. And this is going to build a grid based on the matching that we set up in step 3. So you'll see it kind of looking through leads, looking through contacts, looking through accounts. And then it will display a results grid of those matches organized by match step in step 3, okay? So remember, we had our contact semi-rigid. We look up here at the top. These are all of my matches that were located in that second contact match step. My account rigid step, my account semi-rigid step, and so forth and so on. So from this grid, kind of what happens next when we go and process this? So anything that matches in a contact match step, okay, if we can expand this and see the matching record in Salesforce. So when it finds a match on a contact match step, it's going to send the lead through the conversion process and merge it into the existing contact record, bringing over with it any sub-objects that may be associated with the lead. Okay, so that conversion is going to happen. When a match is found to an account, okay, and it's always going to compare against contacts first if you're looking at both. All right, so it wants to try to find a match on the contact level first. When it doesn't find a match on contacts, that's when it's going to move on and compare against the account object. When it finds a match to an existing account, again, that lead is going to go through the conversion process, but this time it will create a new contact on that existing account. Okay? And again, so this is going to prevent any duplication at the account level that might come from converting leads where that account already exists in Salesforce. Okay, so the goal with all of this is just to limit the amount of duplicates that are in your org between leads and contacts and leads and accounts. Now, this particular scenario, for our final match step, what we want to happen to those leads that didn't match to anything, we told it to do nothing. So we won't even see those leads in this grid. If our goal was to create a new contact, new account for those leads that didn't match to anything else, then we would see those leads in this grid and they would be in the final match step. And we'll look at our next scenario. We'll add that, and so you can kind of see what the difference is there. Okay? Now, that's your high-level overview. So what we want to do now is go back to the beginning and go through each screen again so that you can see all of the different options that you have and what it might take to build a scenario from scratch. Okay, so we're going to go back to step 1, excuse me, and we're going to clear everything out and start at the very beginning. Now, step 1 here, again, this is where we're telling it what leads, we want to compare, what leads we want to look at, and then what contacts and accounts we want to compare those to. You do have some advanced conditioning options here that are new. So we can go our traditional route of selecting leads based on field and criteria that way. Or we have this option here where we can choose to pull down leads based on campaign and take it one step further and choose to pull down leads based on campaign and then campaign status. So if you know you have a group of leads that need to be converted from a particular campaign, you can come here to your drop down and tell it to look at the Ashley test campaign and only download those leads for comparison. If you only wanted to look at members from that campaign with the status of responded, you can choose that too. Okay, so this just gives you access to that campaign and campaign member table so that you can query off of that information. You can also read in a file of lead IDs. And we've had users ask us for this capability for a very long time. So this was really where that came from. So if you identified a list of leads, maybe via a report in Salesforce or some other method, and you know those leads need to be converted, you're going to read that file in here, okay? And you can kind of walk through and convert those that way. And then the last one here is going to pull down any duplicates detected by your lead to contact or lead to account scenarios in Dupe Blocker, where you have the scenario set to report duplicate. So those warnings kind of build up and build up. This allows you to build a lead conversion grid based on those already identified duplicates via Dupe Blocker. Okay, when you use this option, we're not using our matching algorithms in step 3. Okay, it's just going to build our grid. These if we click on one of these, and I might not have any, if we click on one of these, it tells me that there are 196 warnings and 1,286 potential duplicates that have already been identified. So my grid would just consist of these records referenced in this number. All right, so just keep in mind that those options are there for you. We're going to stick here with the traditional way of pulling down leads and contacts to look at. Remember, use all is going to look at everything. We're going to toggle here to use conditions just for time's sake. And this time, let's just look at records owned by a certain group of users. So I'm going to come down here to my field and just choose owner. Operator equals, and we're going to look at all leads that are owned by our CSM team. So that's going to be Charles, Kelly, Jennifer, and Ashley. So we only want to look at leads if they're owned by one of those 4 people, okay? And now we're going to go and do the same thing on contacts and accounts if we wanted to limit the contacts and accounts that we're comparing against. When we come down to the contacts and accounts section, this is where you control whether or not you compare to both of these objects. So if your goal is to create a scenario where you're only comparing against the account object, okay, and you don't want it to consider contacts at all, you're just going to come down over on the right-hand side here and choose Do Not Use. And once you do that, moving forward, your scenario will not incorporate any contact information, okay? You will strictly be focusing on the comparison at the account level. The same is true if you only wanted to compare against contacts. You would come to your account tab and say Do Not Use, and then therefore moving forward, you wouldn't have any reference to account in any of the other pieces of this scenario. All right. So we're going to compare against both. And just so I'm comparing apples to apples, I'm going to choose again to only look at contacts and accounts owned by a member of my CSM team. So we're going to do owner. And we'll say Charles, Kelly, Jennifer, that's not the right Jennifer. Jennifer and Ashley for account or contacts rather. And then we have to remember to pop over to accounts and do that too. Oh, forgot Charles. Charles, Kelly, Jennifer, and Ashley. Okay, so that's just my conditioning. I've only told it now what leads I want to compare to what contacts and accounts. So now we're going to move into step 2, which is typically another quick step here. Again, this is where we're just choosing those fields, those column headers from that results grid that we saw. This is where we choose what fields we want to show or appear there. I try to grab the same fields in each one. So my lead fields, and I'm also thinking about what fields I'm going to match on. Anything that's going to help me verify my results, or if I'm doing any complicated conditioning in step 1, and I need to make sure that I'm pulled down the right list of leads, contacts, and accounts, I might want to include those fields as well. So we're going to grab first name, last name, company for my lead. Let's grab email, phone, and my mailing street, or actually it's just street on the lead object, and city. Okay? And now I have to do that 2 more times. It's a little bit labor intensive, but remember, we can save these scenarios when we're done. So we hopefully won't have to go through the painstaking setup, but a couple of times. So we'll come down to contacts and grab the same fields or similar fields. You can move them around. So I'm kind of grabbing them in the same order, but you have a drag and drop here. So if you wanted to put them, just kind of go alphabetically to start with and then reorder them by site, you can do that too. Contacts, I'm drilling into account here to grab account name. I know this is small. This screen especially is pretty small. Let's see, email, phone, mailing city. I feel like I'm so slow, guys. I'm sorry. And state. And then account display field, same thing, first name. Oh, account. We're not going to have first name on accounts. Account name. We're going to grab our billing street and city. And what else for accounts? That might be all I need. We might grab phone just for fun. I probably won't match on phone on accounts. And I think that's all I need for the account level. A question came in about a recording of this session. All of the recordings for our sessions are already out there on our forum. So you can go and check that out if you have to drop off for some reason. There's one already out there, and they're very similar from one session to the next. Okay, so we've got our fields that we want to see on our results grid. Now we're going to go into step 3 and tackle our matching, okay? And this is where we got to take a deep breath, and this is where we really going to have to go through with a fine-tune comb and talk about all of the options that you have. We're gonna start pretty slow, and then if you have questions during lead conversion, this is probably going to be where they are. So we'll tackle any questions here as well before we move forward. Okay, so this is what a completely blank step 3 looks like. So when you're not using that pre-built scenario, you will, when you get to step 3, have to come up to the top here and add your contact match steps and your account match steps. Okay? Now, contact match steps are always going to be first. All right, you always want to compare against the contact object before accounts. If you weren't comparing against one or the other, then you wouldn't use any of those types here. So we're going to start with our contact match steps. And once we add that, it adds a blank slate for us to choose the fields we want to match on and the mapping types that we want to use. And now keep in mind that we're using a multi-step process. Okay, so we're typically going to start rigid. Our first match step is going to be rigid, and then we'll loosen up a little bit as we go. And it will compare against your records in the order that we see here. Okay, so that's why we want our first contact match step to be our most rigid, the one where we have the highest level of certainty that it's matching to the right record, and it gets the chance to match to that record first. And then in our subsequent match steps, we might change the fields that we're matching on or match on less fields to try to match to more records. What you can do to kind of make it easier to determine or verify your results in step 4 is to rename these here. So we might call this match step 1 contact match rigid. Whoops, if I could spell. And you might even include some information about the fields that you're matching on so you know what to look for. There is a new color coding option in the grid that will turn on that will highlight the fields that we're matching on in each scenario, which visually makes it easier to say, okay, it's highlighted first name, last name, company, so that's the fields I'm matching on in this particular scenario. Okay, so we've got it renamed. Now we're just going to come down and add a mapping condition for each field that we want to match on. So this one, we're going to match on the most amount of fields. So I'm going to do first name, last name, company, street address, and city. First thing I have to do once I add that mapping condition row is choose the lead field that I want to match on. So we'll choose first name, contact field first name, and then I'm going to choose my mapping type. And remember, your mapping types are what allows you to match in ways other than exact. Now, you have exact as an option, so you can use that, and it will be the default. But a lot of times you want to switch that out and use one of the mapping types designed for certain field types just to help improve the matching capabilities here. So for this first name field, we actually have a mapping type designed to match nicknames and long versions of names. So we go to our drop down here. This is a list of all the mapping types you have access to. All of these are documented in the help docs, okay? So I'm going to give you some overviews of a lot of these. It's a lot of detail. So if you want to go back and review that, I'll put that link in the chat window towards the end of the class so you'll have access to that. First name. First name mapping type up here in the upper right-hand corner. You can view and edit this if you need to. Okay, so if I wanted to make sure that a certain value is represented here, I can come here and say that, okay, Alex will be seen as Alexander, or I can add to this if I wanted to. All right, so now we're going to add another mapping condition on last name. Last name on the lead, last name on the contact. And my mapping type for last name, I'm just going to leave that at exact. There's a first XX words. If you have any suffixes included in your last name field that need to be ignored, you could just tell it to look at the first word in the last name field. So there's lots of different ways that you can mix this up to make it work better with your data. I'm next going to use the company field on the lead to the account name field on the contact. So I'm actually going to drill into the account object here and scroll down and find account name. Okay, and for account name to company, the go-to mapping type here on a rigid scenario is called this cleaned account name. And your cleaned account name almost takes your account names through a 3-step cleansing process. When I say cleansing, it's not making any physical changes to those account names, but just in how DemandTools is viewing that data when it's trying to match it together. You also have visibility of the tables that this mapping type references here. All right, and this is the same table that your single table dedupe or find IDs is using. So if you've gone in and edited in that module, those changes will reflect here as well. It's the same file. So your replace tab, when it's looking at account names or company names, anytime here it sees a value on the left, it's going to view it as the value over here on the right. Okay. The default list is everything from this blue line up. Everything else I have added. my suffix removal. Anytime one of these words is at the end of the account name, it's going to be ignored and not analyzed. That example we talked about at the beginning, Staples Incorporated versus Staples Inc. This is the place that was able to ignore that Inc. and Incorporated, okay, using clean account name mapping type. And then the last one here, prefixes, is going to any of these words that are at the beginning of the account name are just going to be ignored and not analyzed. Okay, so these are all fairly rigid mapping types. We're going to move on to street address on the lead, to mailing street on the contact. And we'll apply a mapping type here. You've got two options for street address matching. The street address option is the more rigid option, so you may choose to use that in your rigid match step. It wants all of the same elements to be in both addresses. Okay, so if one has a suite number, the other one would have to have the suite number. The relaxed address match option gives you a little bit more wiggle room, and we should see some good results or good examples of this when we get to a grid at this point. But relaxed address is really just parsing out the street number and the street name. Okay, so if you have extra information in that field, such as a PO box, or if one has a suite number or a floor number and the other one does not, relaxed address will still be able to match those together as long as it can parse out the street number and name. Okay, so that's not too rigid, but rigid enough for my data. Once you get your rigid scenario set up, now you can come up to add contact match step and add a completely blank match step. Or if you know that you're going to use some variation of this, so maybe we just want to loosen this by changing a mapping type or removing a field, we do have over on the right a clone option. So if I clone this, it'll give me a carbon copy, and now I can go in and make my necessary changes. So maybe for this second match step here, we want to remove street address. So I'm just going to highlight that row and hit delete on my keyboard, and now we're just going to match on first name, last name, company name. And we'll call this our semi-rigid. All right, and we might clone that again. Remember, we're just going rigid to loose. We're thinking of different ways that we can try to match this data together. So we'll clone this again. This time, I'm going to use this pretty much the same scenario, but instead of using my clean account name mapping type, I'm going to switch it out and tell it to just look at the first two words in the account name. Okay, so if I have any variations at the end of the account name, it'll ignore those and not analyze them. I'm also going to add another condition of city on here just to make sure I don't get any false positives. All right, so we're going to add mailing city, and that's going to have to be exact. But I'm also going to come over here and tell it if it can match blank values together. So this match blank values option opens up your match step a little bit so that if two records match on, let's say, first name, last name, and company, but they're both blank on the city field, okay, then lead conversion will still be able to see those as matches. It kind of allows those blank strings of data to be seen as matching data. What makes match blank values does not do, and this is one of those misconceptions that tends to come up a lot. If you have two records where, let's say, we're matching on city, and one has the city field populated and the other one does not, as long as we have city as part of our criteria, those records are not going to be seen as matches, okay, or as duplicates. So if we have a low usage rate on a certain field, you definitely want to have a scenario where maybe you do not look at that field, just to make sure you're not missing some obvious matches. Okay, so we're going to call this semi-rigid. And I'm going to say account name first XX words, so I can make sure in my results grid, then I'm looking for that. So I'm looking more closely at account name there, since that's kind of different than the matching I've done in my previous match step. Okay, so we can clone that one more time. And again, you can make this as simple or as complicated as you want to. All right, so you might have just one match step per object. You might have 10 per object. It really is just designed to meet the needs of your org and what you feel like you need to put into this. So my last one here, I don't know if I want to go that loose. So you could do just a first name and last name, but you really have to be careful not to be too loose here. Because how this is going to work is, it could match to a couple of different records here, and which would make it a little bit more manual. And we want to have some kind of identifier here. If I have, two Jessica Joneses in my org, or two John Does, that I'm matching to the right person. So when we get super loose like this, just looking at first name, last name, this might be a review step, okay, where we just go through and make sure that we verify our results. We'll call this very loose, and I'm putting in all caps just so I'll draw my attention to it. All right, once you have your contact match steps built out, you'll do something similar with accounts. So we'll go add account match step. And this one we're going to keep pretty simple. We're just going to match on the company field from the lead, account name field for the contact, and cleaned account name. I will use a billing street here, street for lead, billing street for account. And we'll use that relaxed address there. Then I'll clone that. I'm going to add match blank here and do first XX words. Okay, and maybe I won't do street, and maybe I'll just do city. And that'll be as loose as I want to get on accounts. Let's rename these. Okay. All right, so that's kind of the process that you'll go through. It does take a little bit of testing and finesse to get it to a spot where you're comfortable with it. So, set it up in a sandbox, start small, maybe segment down, to a smaller group of records so that your results can be more easily verified, just to make sure that things are matching the way that they should. Okay, once you have your match steps set up, you also have some additional features or options rather towards the bottom of the screen that you have to pay attention to as well. So down here, default record selection. This comes into play if you have a lead that matches to multiple contacts or multiple accounts. And it would be where you designate, in the event that happens, which record you want it to merge into or use, so to speak. And so your options are oldest, newest, or last modified, with an additional option here to choose the one that has the active owner, so that you're making sure you're not merging into a record that is owned by an inactive user. You can override this in the results grid. So when you're spot checking, it's automatically going to select to merge into whichever option you choose here. But then in looking at it, if you want to choose something else, you can just move that checkbox to update that. Lead settings, since we are using the lead conversion call, we do have to indicate a lead status. So we can choose from our drop down here, and this is going to pull from your lead process in Salesforce. So it's going to match what your lead statuses are in Salesforce. We do have a lot of users that will add a duplicate lead status here, so that, especially if you are reporting on lead status, you wouldn't want to just by default put everything to qualified, and then all of a sudden, November has been an awesome month from that respect. So that duplicate would just indicate that it was converted because of this process. The other option here is to overwrite your lead source. And that really comes to a conversation about field values in general. And it all comes down to this Salesforce lead conversion call. Okay. So this is going to execute exactly like it would if you were to convert a lead in Salesforce. And with that, we don't have the option of retaining information from the lead record on the matching contact unless the contact field is currently blank. Okay, so the kind of general rule of thumb is contact information will always win unless it's blank. When it's blank, it's going to follow your lead mapping, again, from that lead process. But the exception to that rule is your lead source field. So if you wanted to keep the lead source from this current lead you're converting and overwrite what's currently on the lead, then you can, on the contact rather, you can overwrite your lead source here. Okay, question came in. You are editing the lead settings on match 6. Okay, I thought you could only do it on the final. You're going to do this on every match step, okay? So I'm just using it as an example in match step 6 because that's where we stopped, but you would come in each step here, okay, and set that up, okay? And make sure that you choose the same options each time. And then it will, because there are times when it might be different. So for contacts, you might want it to choose the newest record. Okay, so you might, for all your contact match steps, choose newest. But then on accounts, maybe you want the most recently modified. So you have control to change that with each match step. Most of the time, in my experience with users, they have been the same each time. I wish there was a copy button. But if you're cloning those match steps, so in match step 1, if you set your contact up exactly like you want it here, when you clone that, you'll get all of that information copied over. Does that make sense? Does that clarify a little bit? Okay, good. All right, and so then again, on each match step, we're going to go back to 6 where we started. You also, if you scroll down, you on accounts, you're going to control your new contact ownership settings, okay? Because remember, a new contact is being created here. So your options are to keep the current lead owner, the owner of the new account, or new contact rather, sorry. Or you can assign that new contact to the current account owner, or anybody from your org, any active user, using that custom owner option. And then you have special settings here for anything that's inactive or owned by a queue or a group. So you can designate those here also. You won't see that section on contacts, but you do have the inactive queue or group owner on the contact settings or match steps. All right, the last two here that are available for both contacts and accounts, you have the ability to create an opportunity. Okay, so when that contact or that lead's converted and the new contact's created, or when the lead's converted and the new contact on the account is created, you can create an opportunity. All right, and those are your options, ownership options, close dates, everything you need to create kind of a basic opportunity. And then you've also got some notification settings here. So if you wanted to alert the contact owner of what's going on, okay, that this new record was created, or you can create a task and an added completed task as well. Okay, question on opportunity naming. So you can name that whatever you want there. So that's just a blank field. And then the added option of appending the company name if you wanted to. Okay. Now, the final piece of this, you don't have the option to, on the contact name, no, I think on the opportunity here, it's still company name. So the company name is the only option there for what you can append. Okay, So the last piece to think about on this match step here is final match step. And again, this is where you designate what you want to happen in the event that a lead does not match to a contact, does not match to an account. Okay, the default here is to do nothing. And that probably matches most people's business process. So if it didn't find a duplicate record, we just want to leave it as a lead and not touch it. But you do have the option to create convert that lead, okay, to move forward with the conversion and create a new contact and new account based on that converted lead. All right. If you choose to go that route, you also, and this is very helpful, have this limit new account duplicate by field. And this is going to prevent new account duplicates from being put into your org. So if you've got 6 different leads with Staples and you convert them all, you wouldn't want 6 new Staples accounts with 1 contact each. You want 1 Staples account with 6 contacts associated with them. So this limit new account duplicate by field allows you to achieve that and to kind of look at that data before it's converted and make sure if there's duplicated account information, then that record's only created once. And you control what account information to look at. Okay, so if we add a mapping condition here, we're going to say, let's just look at company name on the lead. You could add address or phone number, whatever is important in your org. All right, we're going to leave that. I'm going to leave that on so we can see what a grid looks like when we're choosing to convert non-match leads to contacts and accounts. You also have your conversion settings, ownership settings, opportunity and tasks available on this final match step as well. Okay, so if we're converting like we are, we want to make sure we have a lead status set, and we also want to make sure we identify ownership of who should own the new contact, new account. Now, this is only coming into play if we're using new contact, new account. If we're doing nothing, then we don't have to fill any of this out because it wouldn't make a difference. Okay, so again, step 3 is where you're going to spend the most amount of time in setting these scenarios up. Once you get to this point, before you find matches, I would always recommend just doing a quick save on this scenario. Whoop, I've been clicking around too much. Let me go back and uncheck some things. Save this scenario so that, if something goes bump when it's finding matches, if you hit an API glitch, you don't lose all of this because it can take a little bit of time to set this up. So we'll just call this lead conversion scenario 1. And just do a quick save on that. Okay, now we're going to go into step 4. And it always tells me if something's changed. So that's just a pop-up here that you'll see if you've run a couple of different scenarios. It wants you just to remember to keep finding matches, to update it to the current set of criteria that you're using. So we can go through here and find matches. We're looking at a little bit higher number of records here. So we'll see what this gives us back. Probably more than I wanted to look at for training, but that's okay. Here it comes. All right, so now we have our grid displayed. So let's kind of go through this grid now with a fine-tooth comb since we kind of just did an overview before. So when we look at our grid, again, our column headers here are what we chose in step 2 that we wanted to see in our results grid. So now we see this group here of final match. These are all of my records that didn't match to anything else in Salesforce. So they will be converted, new contact, new account for each. Again, if you're doing nothing, it won't display those in your grid. Okay, so keep that in mind. If we scroll down, we'll eventually see our other match steps here. Let's get to the top of one. Actually, let's just resort. That'll be easier. All right, And I see all my match steps here. And again, for all of these, this is my semi-rigid first XX words account. When I expand, I'm able to see the records that it matched to in Salesforce. So in this case, we matched to a lot of other Oregon State universities. This is where that default account selection comes in. It's going to automatically check the one, select the one that I indicated in that particular match step. All right, so last modified, newest, or oldest. Now, here's what I love about this grid that's kind of a new concept in DemandTools in general. I can come down here to my grid display, bottom left, all right, and I've got some information I can color, the owners based on active and inactive users, but I can also color my matches here. And what that does for each group, it's going to highlight the fields that we were matching on. So in this semi-rigid scenario, I was matching on account name and city. So it highlights that there. So it just draws my eyes there when I'm trying to determine if the matches are good matches or not. All right, so if I scroll down to another match step, that one's big. All right, let's go to a contact. Did I have any contact matches? I might not have. There we go. Here's my very loose contact match step. I probably really need to look at this one closely. I probably have a lot of mismatches here. But it's highlighting the first name and last name, okay? And that's what I'm matching on in this very loose step. So when I go into this one, I can verify, and definitely do this for each of your match steps before you process the first time. Make sure that it's matching to the right record. So this one, I said, very loose. We want to make sure we review it. The first one I clicked on, my lead is Jason Jacobs with Phoenix Physicians. My contact is Jason Jacobs with, I didn't bring my account name in here. Oh, there it is. No, I didn't bring account name. Anyway, I'm assuming it's the wrong Jason Jacobs. So that would be an indication that I need to go back and beef up that match step, or maybe get rid of it. So this verification piece is just really important, and use that color matches option to help draw your eyes to the fields that you're matching on there. Okay, some other things before we go through and convert some of these. You do have an option here as to what's checked in this grid. So when you get here, if you decide, you know what, I only want to process my account matches. All right, so you can tell it to only check your account matches. Or I can come back and tell it to check all. By default, everything is unchecked to start out with. So you do have to come here and tell it to check a group of records or all of your records before you can go and convert anything. The other option you have is some export options. Okay, I can export everything into a spreadsheet if I needed to, export my checked matches, or export everything in this formatted format, which makes it a little bit easier to read. I also have this, let's update, grid here that shows me how many records are in this grid. Okay, so if you want to have an idea as to how many records are going to be affected by this particular job, your conversion status box will give you that information. So 2,800 leads, 2,800 leads to convert, creating 2,800 contacts, and 1,300 accounts. Found match report. This gives you the detail of those numbers, okay, based on match step, what's being converted in each one. So this kind of gives you an idea as to the effectiveness of your match steps, really, or where most of your matches are being located. So in this one, most of mine didn't match to anything. So that could either be a good thing or a bad thing. If I've already done most of my deduplication, we would expect for that number to be higher. And then for each match step, you can see how many records were selected in each. Now, the last thing here is another thing we've been asked for enough that it kind of became a priority. And this is based on this new trend that we're seeing of people wanting to populate the account ID of the matching account onto the lead record. So not necessarily wanting to convert that lead to a new contact under the existing account, but identifying that that lead does have an account that already exists by populating that account ID on the lead record. So that's why you'll see this populate account ID option here. And when you click this, it is going to give you a list of all the fields on your lead page. So you will choose here the field where you want to house that ID. So I would just choose my account lookup. When I click add, it's going to execute that immediately, okay? Meaning it's going to populate your account ID on your lead for all of the records in this grid the second I click add. And I'm not going to do it because this grid's a little bit larger than I wanted, so it would take a little bit of time, okay? So it won't process your conversions, just updating those leads with that account lookup information. Okay, so let's go through now. Okay, so question, I showed that Jason Jacobs was not an actual match. How would you check or uncheck to not merge those records? I would just use my checkbox over here on the left for anything that I did not want to be processed. So when I'm going through this, if I find things that are not matches or things that I don't want to process, I'm just going to uncheck my records here. Okay, anything that does not have a checkbox, a box checked will not process when I come down and convert leads. And I'm actually going to do that now because I don't want to convert this whole grid. So we're going to tell it to check none. And now I'm just going to go through and select a few so we can look at so unchecked records, nothing will happen to them. So if it matched to the wrong record and I didn't want that lead to convert into that record, no, okay, I see what you're saying now. All right, one more thing. Let me show you that piece. If you have, so for, well, we're going to pretend this is Jason Jacobs again. If you have a contact that matches to the wrong person, but your end game is to create a new contact, new account, right? And you want those records to be created, you can right click on the row and move it to final match. And that will do whatever you set up in final match. So if you told it to do nothing, it will do nothing. So it's essentially the same as unchecking it. But if you're creating a new contact, new account, then you move final match and it's going to move it to that match step and therefore create a new contact, new account. Okay, so let's check none again. And we'll just go through and process a few from each group. All right. And then I'm going to come down to the bottom right-hand corner and click Convert Check Leads. With this process, it's really important to remember that due to the nature of this conversion call, we do not get a restore file for this, okay? So once these records are converted, they are converted and there is no magic undo. So this error message, just pop up, reminds you of that each time. So we're going to move forward and click yes, and we'll kind of see this going through the process here. And once it's done, it will alert us if there were any errors or not. I didn't have any in this job, which is good, but those are all going to be written right here. So we get a log file. It's a running log of everything we've done in DemandTools on a given day. So if you did throw any errors during a job, this is going to be where you go to find out what those were. And then the last thing you get is you do get an ID with all of your ID, a file. Whoops, that's not the right file. All right, let's close all of these and try again. Goodness, too many things open. Anyway, this is a file with your IDs of the records that have been converted. So it's going to give you your lead IDs, your contact IDs, your account IDs, and the IDs of your opportunities that were created. So it's kind of just one-stop shopping of everything that, oh, here it is, that was created as part of that job. All right, let's try it now. Here we go. There we go. Okay. So if you did need to access this information for anything, you could do that here. All right. Okay, we are running very close to the end of our hour. So that really is kind of a detailed walkthrough of lead conversion. There are a lot of options. So this training is out there, or a similar training is out there on the forum for you guys to take a look at. If you need kind of a refresher on things, my recommendation is get in as quickly as possible after our call today and just kind of, feel your way through it. You can always start in a sandbox. So if you haven't hooked DemandTools up with a sandbox, definitely do that. That's a really good place to get comfortable with this. I will hang around. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask those now. And if not, if you feel like you've gotten what you need, by all means, drop off the call and have a great rest of your day. And let's see what we have at the end of the day today. So single table dedupe fundamentals is at 3 p.m. Eastern time, so in 2 hours, if you are wanting more this afternoon. All right, thanks, guys. I'm here for questions. Have a great weekend. Thanks, guys. Have a great afternoon.